Good morning, everyone. I want everybody to look at your watch right now. I cannot win. Does not matter how hard I try. To people at home, it wasn't my fault. It was Moose's fault. He was talking to me, and he turned me so my back was to the clock. I couldn't see it. It is so hard to synchronize the live service with the online stuff. But we won't stop trying. Sooner or later, we'll figure it out. Maybe I'll have to hide below the stage, and at 11, I just pop up out of the floors. Oh, man. Okay. Well, there was a king who was only 12 inches tall. He was a terrible king, but he was a great ruler. A priest, a pastor, and a rabbit are donating blood. The rabbit says, "I think I'm a typo." It'll take a second. It'll take a second. If somebody next to you is not laughing, just explain it to them. I bought an expensive Rolls Royce, but didn't pay for a driver. All that money and nothing to show for it. Come on, that was good. Kind of good, I don't know. My doctor recommended I buy orthopedic insoles. I didn't think they would work, but now I stand corrected. Oh, man. You know, the other day my friend said to me, "What rhymes with orange?" And I said, "No, it doesn't." And of course, that was my favorite. Well, hey, today we're going to be talking about what I call foundations and just the importance of having a foundation in your life and how critical they are and exactly what have you built your life on. You know, what is the foundation that you're on? But before we get into that, I've always been intrigued, even when I was young, with skyscrapers and just amazed. One, when you stop and realize, like the Empire State Building, when they built that thing back in the late 20s, 30s, whatever that was a whole different kind of technology, compared to what we have today. But I got a short little video on just how they do these skyscrapers. So let's watch that together.
layer of subsurface rock that is largely immune to shifting. In cases where bedrock is available to be built on, engineers will dig down to that level and anchor the foundation to the bedrock with steel or reinforced concrete columns. However, being able to construct a skyscraper on bedrock is something that is specific to geography and geology. In many places, bedrock isn't close to the surface. The Burj Khalifa, for example, had only very weak sandstone accessible to it due to the region's sandy nature. In this case, engineers had to use a series of long piles driven into the ground. This is another common skyscraper foundation technique, and it's based solely on the principle of friction. Rather than constructing the building on bedrock, the building sits on hundreds of piles that use friction forces from the sand to keep them from sliding down. This pile foundation doesn't technically rest on bedrock. Rather, it's just the friction between the sand and soil that keeps them from moving. After the foundation is built, usually using large amounts of concrete, then engineers can start building up. Advances in steel are largely what have allowed modern skyscrapers to come into existence. Skyscrapers are essentially built out as steel skeletons before all of the windows and exterior structure is added. There are beams and vertical columns connecting each floor, held together by rivets and bolts. Steel functions well in both compression and tension, whereas concrete really only works under compression loading. The ability of steel to be used in both tension and compression makes it perfect for engineering large spans in skyscrapers. All of the weight and force is transferred through the steel to the ground, where it's distributed through the concrete foundation. Once the steel skeleton and core is built, the rest is essentially just decoration. However, modern skyscrapers also have many things that work against them. These include wind and earthquakes. Skyscrapers' biggest daily threat is the wind forces causing them to wobble or crack. Engineers protect skyscrapers against the wind in two main ways. In many cases, the actual design of the building is altered to make it more aerodynamic. Back to the Burj Khalifa, this building was actually designed to minimize vibration wind loading, making the net wind force on the building essentially cancel out. However, not every skyscraper can be as geometrically interesting as the Burj Khalifa. Most modern skyscrapers will have something called a tuned mass damper. This is essentially a giant pendulum that sits near the top of the skyscraper and acts as a counterweight to absorb and cancel out the forces from the wind. And that's essentially how engineers do it. Through the advances in modern steel, concrete, and construction practices, humankind will likely continue to reach onward and upward through the construction of skyscrapers.
Has anybody ever been to New York City? You done the Empire State Building? You know, they say if you throw a penny off of it that it would kill somebody. So as a kid, of course, I tried that. And then later on, I was like, wow, me and my brother are throwing pennies off like crazy. But later on, I watched Mythbusters, and it was busted. It's not true. A penny will not kill you coming off the Empire State Building. They actually did all the math on it and figured it out, and they made a gun that would shoot the penny at the same velocity that it would be coming off the Empire State Building. And it just give you a wicked headache. That's about all it did. So you have to look that up on Mythbusters. It's really interesting. It made me feel a little better that I didn't probably kill anybody when I was young. That would be horrible. But there is something about it, right? When you're up in one of those huge skyscrapers. We went to Chicago, and we went up in the Sears Tower and the John Hancock, and it's just something else, man, when you get up there. You know, when I was at the Empire State Building and I was outside at the 86th floor, you know, and they got this big, huge iron kind of hooking in, so it's really hard to get around it. What hits me when I'm up there is, it's one thing to be out here and feel a little queasy looking down and stuff, and then I always think, how about the guys that were on the outside of this building it? Holy mackerel. That's what hit me, is like, that takes a special kind right there. You know, those guys in the early 30s when a lot of Manhattan was developed is unreal. And the sad thing is, when construction companies would take on these mega projects back then, one of the formulas that they would calculate and factor for was the number of people that would die. That was actually worked into the calculations. Isn't that crazy? Like, yeah, we'll probably lose about 5% of the workforce. like it's just another number. I don't know. That blew my mind when I was reading about that, but that was the reality for sure. Matthew 7:25. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. And so we're going to look at a few things here, a little bit in the Old Testament, and talk about and applying this idea of a solid foundation to ourselves and our lives. And what are our lives built on is really where I want to go. So let me jump to Hebrews chapter 11. It was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months when he was born. They saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's commands. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt. For he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. And that's a testimony, as Paul was talking about Moses, who was a character that they all would have been very, very, very familiar with, as the first 5 books of the Bible are accredited to Moses penning them. Now, we can get into all that, but that's the common, thought there. And so they would have been reading out of that, the Torah, and they all would have been very, very familiar with the stories about Moses. And so today, I'm going to grab 4 key foundational issues that we can pull from Moses and apply to our lives. We're going to talk about identity, the question of who I am. We're going to talk about responsibility. What will I do with my life? We're going to talk about priority, what is really most important. And then we're going to talk about difficulty. How much am I willing to commit? Everybody will say they'll do things until we really face the price. And that's when you decide what you're really made of, what you're really willing to do and commit. So the foundation for personal success, to live a life that's honoring to God, will come in these things. And we can look at Moses to learn. We need to discover what God made me to be. What God made me to be. There's a certain reality that we face in our lives, and I love this picture, with the little kitten looking in the mirror, and it sees the lion. I just think that's so powerful. And that's seeing yourself how God sees you. See, when God looks at you, he looks at your potential. He looks at what he can do with you. He looks at what you can become, and he wants that for you, for sure. But one of the biggest limiting factors is we don't try to see ourselves as God sees us. We fail to do that. And so you got to understand there's something greater inside of you. It's there. It just hasn't fully come out yet. Don't give up on that. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Now, that's really easy for me to read. That's a whole other thing to think about. Pharaoh, it'd be like growing up in the richest person's house. You would have had everything. Everything at your disposal. Servants, you wouldn't have to lift a finger if you didn't want to. You'd be rich, you wouldn't have to work, you wouldn't have to worry about anything. Nothing would matter, really, just other than having fun and, going around and having everybody wait on you hand and foot and just live the perfect life that everybody dreams about, that they think is so perfect, having all that money and everything. But he saw that. He fully knew that was the life he could have had, and instead, he walked away from it. Now, how many of you would do that? That's rubber meeting the road kind of stuff. There's easy street, everything you need. How many of you would say, no, I'm not going to do that even though I could? because God wants me to do this. I'm just throwing it out there. You know, it's easy to look at it and read it and go, yeah, I would be like that and do what Moses did. And, would we? I'm not so sure sometimes, you know. The foundation, 2, we need to accept responsibility for our lives. Accept responsibility for our lives. I often look at life very much like this. Next picture here. Life is what happens to me, or is life what I make happen? 2 different mentalities. A lot of people, oh, that's just the cards I was dealt. Not much I can do about it. Wasn't my fault, it just happened. That's my lot in life. I know a lot of people walking around looking like Eeyore. And they walk out life like that, like Eeyore, and they just want people to feel sorry for them. They just want people to help them out and feel bad for them. Now, sometimes there's a season of maybe being down a little bit, being blue a little bit. But let me tell you, you can't live there. You're not meant to live there. You're not meant to stay there. You got to keep going. And the truth is, the Lord has given you all kinds of gifts and abilities to make a difference. Are you going to sit back and let it happen to you? Or are you going to bring it to life? Now, you guys know I do a lot of coaching analogies just because I spent years and years coaching different things. So I can remember when I was teaching or coaching football, which was a lot of fun. And I remember telling the kids, you know, and I get them in junior high. And it was always funny because there was kids, you always had that 1 or 2 that just loved to hit. Like, I do this and I don't get in trouble, kids. You know, they're your natural linebackers. Love those kids. They're easy. You know, and they're the kids that, like, when we'd line up and do a Oklahoma drill or something, they'd be counting. Like, I do not want to go against him. Like, and they'd step back and let somebody go ahead, you know. And there's those kids. And then there's other kids I could tell were just terrified of the physical contact. And I used to tell them, I don't care if you're on offense or defense, you can hit. Huh? You know, and I'm like, grab that ball, and as a running back, are you getting hit or are you delivering the pain? You know, kind of football talk, you know. But it's like, who's dishing it out? Hit or be hit. I used to say that all the time. Hit or be hit, your choice. I don't care if you're on offense or defense. Who's delivering? Right? And I would coach them to that. I'm like, don't be afraid. Take it to them. I love football. Sorry, I would get all excited. I just like, man, you got to get amped up. You know, you got to commit. And the worst thing is when what would drive me crazy, I don't know how many times I was, you know, broken record stuff. It's like, this ain't two-hand touch. Knock it off. You know, when they would do the high tackle and they just try to grab at them. Oh, that would drive me crazy. I'm like, well, it's not two-hand touch. And what it was is it was a fear of hitting. They didn't want to hit. And I'm like, knock it off. You got to hit them. You got to do it. So we would do the donut drill and the bag drill, and we had all kinds of techniques to build their confidence to get there. But it's a mentality in life. You know, that's just football. That's nothing compared to life. And in life, a lot of people take that same mentality. They're just so scared of what's coming at them, and they just let it happen. And I'm just like, nah, man. You know, a lot of crap will come your way. Life has a way of delivering that stuff. But what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to sit there and take it over and over again, you know? It's like the guy getting slapped in the face. He just stands there, bam, bam. At what point are you going to move your face? Like, I see that in life so many times. People just stand there and take it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Why is everything so terrible for me? Why can't I get out of this situation? Move. Do something different. That's huge, and I'm astounded by how many people get stuck in that. And so with life, I don't care what your scenario is, you know, you've got opportunity in front of you. You cannot change the past. You know how much time I spend on the past as far as wishing I could change it? Not very much. Yeah, I might get a little bit of nostalgia here and there, and I might think back on some things, but it always come to the point of, well, I can't do anything about that. All I can do something about is today and what's coming. I can focus on that. That'll have some fruit. That'll have some return. Can't spend too much time. You can learn from the past. That's extremely important. right? That's where we gain wisdom. But don't live back there. That's not healthy. You know, you be the type of person that when you jump off a diving board into the water, you don't get wet. The water gets a little bit of you. It's a mentality thing. It's a mentality, you know. And back to football, they'll use a term a lot about imposing your will on the other team or on the other guys. It's the same idea. Who's delivering it? Who's putting it out there? And I think a lot of that grit would be a term I'd use for that, is useful in life skills. You need that grit. You need that staying power. You need to deal with a whole lot of everything sucks, but I'm not giving up. I'm not going down with this. I'll just live for another day. I'll just show up one more day. There's something about that is very critical in our walks in normal life and spiritual life and everything. So much of it is showing up and just not white flagging it. And so you got to understand that in accepting responsibility, it's here I am, here's my circumstances. There's certain things I cannot change. So accept that. And then you start to look forward. Hebrews 11. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. 3 facts. I can't live off others' spiritual commitment. I can't blame others for the direction of my life. No one can ruin my life except me. And you've heard people talk about it. A lot of people are victims of horrific things. Stuff that's happened to you that you maybe had no control over. But how you choose to move forward, you do have control over. Are you going to let that thing dominate you the rest of your life? And a lot of people do. It's hard. I get it. But are you going to let that dominate you the rest of your life? At that point, you're choosing to live in that place. Look at when something horrific happens, I'm not saying you ignore it and pretend that it didn't happen. I don't believe that at all. We all walk with scars. And those scars are reminders of the wounds that we've taken. And you carry those scars with you. But you move on. You keep going. Okay? You get to a point when you have control and you can choose to stay a victim and stay in that mentality, or you can flip the switch and say, no, I'm going to go forward and I'm going to go after it. Whatever it is, I'm going to do what I can do to change things. And thank God I'm a Christian and I don't have to do this alone. Too many people I've talked to stay in those places. You can take a thing I've seen God do. Right now they're working through that John Eldridge book that I love so much called Wild at Heart. It's just a really gripping book. There's a lot in there. And in my life, that book was huge. At one point, I kind of came to grips with the idea that, I didn't have a dad growing up. And for years, most of you know my story, the way that affected me is it just made me kind of callous and cold. Made me kind of person who wouldn't trust anybody. Because, some of those things affect you. You don't realize it, but I just internalized it. It's like, yeah, sooner or later people will abandon you, especially when you need them. That's how life works. That stuff got formed in me as a little guy. And how many baseball games I played and my dad never showed up, not once. And I just learned to tune it out. Oh, well, that's how it is. And then push through it. And then when I was 30-ish in that zone, and I had my own kids, and they were growing up, it all started coming back to me. Like, you mean this is the crap that my dad skipped out on? And it hit me even more, like, what a flippin' loser that guy was. And it reopened that wound that never healed. I just kind of kept moving. And it ripped it open, and I was like, what kind of jerk abandons his kids? And all this anger started to come. I got into that phase. And I was really, really angry for a long time. And then I read the book, and that book talks about some of those issues and the wounds that we deal with. And I finally dealt with that. I went down to Texas where my dad was living. And I had a conversation with him. It was something I needed to do. It was huge. And I unloaded on him. It was great. He was on wife number 5 or 6 or whatever. And we're sitting there, and he had his own issues or whatever. And I remember talking to him, and he thought he was just going to have a nice lunch with me. I was on a mission at that point. And I looked right at him. I said, what kind of guy abandons his kids? And he was like, oh, that's a good opener, huh? And he was like, choking on it. I still remember the conversation to this day. He's like, oh, you want to go out and, see the farm and this and that? I said, I'm good right here. Let's talk about this. And I wasn't letting him off the hook. I said, how do you do that? I said, I have my own family now. That would be the last thing I'd ever do. How do you do that? And it dumbfounded me, and he really didn't have much of an answer. He just said, it's the biggest regret of my life. Well, that's a start. That's how I felt. And we went on and we talked and whatever. But something happened that weekend that was huge. I forgave him. I finally forgave my dad. I just let it go. Did it fix anything from my past? Nope. Did it change anything? Nope. Did I go on to have a wonderful new relationship with my dad and we were fishing buddies and we hung out and stuff? No, not at all. None of that. But it freed me up and it released me to move on and say, you know what, I can't change that, but I came more determined to be a better dad to my kids. That's how I channeled that. I became more determined than ever to be there for my kids and my family and to never abandon them and do whatever I could for them. God can take your greatest pain, whatever it is, and if you allow him to do the work he needs to do, he can take that festering wound and lead it to a scar where, yeah, it's there. I went through that. But then it can become one of your greatest things in life, one of your greatest ways to minister to people and help people because you've been there. You understand what it's like. You know how to help people going through the same kind of things. It's a powerful thing, very much so. God will not waste any pain, I promise you. If you'll let him redeem it, he can redeem the pain. Number 3, establish a value system for my life. And so that sounds kind of corporate-y. I get that. What's our vision, mission, values, blah, blah, blah. Well, let me read the scripture. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. See, the world, if you will, we talk about the world, what they value is power and prestige, pleasure, and possessions. Preacher friend of mine, Art Snow, said it to me in a very simple way back in the day. He said, be careful of the 3 G's. Really? He's like, yeah, that's what takes them all down. Well, what do you mean? That's what takes all the everybody. Sooner or later, if they're going to fall, they're going to mess up, it'll be one of the 3 G's. I said, okay, what are they? He said, the gold, the glory, and the girls. Or if you're talking to a girl, the guys. In this day and age, I guess all the above. But he said, the gold, the glory, and the girls. If you're going to fall, if you're going to mess up, it'll be one of those 3. That was some wisdom. Really, I never forgot that. I was like, he's pretty much got that. He's got that down. And so, what are you struggling with on the 3 G's? Which one is it? Right? Because the enemy knows your proclivity. He knows your weakness. And he'll poke at it. He'll push at it. And so you got to be aware. We got to be aware of that. Moses' value system, God's purpose is more valuable than popularity. People are more valuable than pleasures. God's peace is more valuable than possessions. Let those sink in. Are those your same values, spiritually speaking? Is that the foundation you're building on? Is that core stuff that you can count on in your spiritual journey? That when the wind blows, when the earthquake hits, when it gets intense, and life does, what's holding you on that foundation so that you know you can withstand and go through these kinds of things? Good questions. Number 4, never take your eyes off the goal. Never take your eyes off the goal. This next picture I've lived out far too many times in my life. I was just sharing with somebody, they're asking me about our new place, and I forget who it was, and they're, how'd you do? How'd deer season go? Did you get something, this and that? And my story from last deer season is fantastic. I've learned to really embrace it. I love it. I got these trail cameras as a gift, and Julie and I are obsessed with them. That's how pathetic we are. That's our entertainment. We look at trail cam pictures all the time. And this past season, I'd been watching a couple of bucks, and I was up there hunting, and I'm in the stand, and I could just sit out there. The older I get, I don't even care that much, about getting a deer, but I just love the peace of being out there. But these 5 does come walking in, and I'm up and ready, and I wasn't going to shoot a doe. I was just waiting, but I was up and all in position. And sure enough, so much of life happens this way, right? I've been hunting this deer. It didn't start in the fall, man. I've been hunting this guy back in the spring, watching him and patterning him and all this stuff. Yeah, if you're not into hunting, just hang on. I'll get out of this analogy. But here's the deal. I'm after this guy, and he was a nice wall hanger kind of buck, and 5 doe walk in, and I love that game where I can try to be a woods ninja, and if I can be there and not spook them, and how close can they get, and I love all that stuff. And as soon as they walk on out, I was like, oh, and I sat back down, and I looked down, and there was the buck right underneath me. He had come in the other direction. I should have put the picture up. I'm going to frame it one day. There's me in the stand. You can see it from the trail camera. I'm like sitting there without the bow drawn, and there's this massive buck right below me. And I'm stuck. Oh, it was Randy. That's who I was talking to. I just kicked. And I was stuck. If you bow hunt, you can't make a lot of movement. And I'm like, I was so angry at myself for a minute because I didn't keep my eyes on the prize. I let my guard down. I just relaxed. I let my guard down, and then boom, the guy I've been waiting for. I could have jumped out and got him with a jackknife. That's how close he was to me. He was right there, and there's nothing I can do. Those guys don't get that big by being dumb, right? And so I'm stuck, and I'm trying to, he's milling around. He looks up at me. I freeze. Head goes down. I get this far. He looks at me. I freeze. And we do this game, And I'm like, you try to hold a bow in mid-pull? That's not easy. I'm just saying. You start shaking. And whatever. He takes one last look, and he's like, his spidey senses go off, and he walks away from me, goes in. I try to, he turns sideways. I shoot and miss. But if I was ready, you get the point. I spent all year waiting for this guy, get the magic moment, and I blew it because I didn't stay alert. I didn't stay focused. And that's what happens in life. It's so easy to get distracted. It's so easy to let your guard down. And then we get caught. We're vulnerable. Hebrews 11, by faith he left Egypt. Not fearing the king's anger, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. That's pretty cool. It was his faith that did it. It was his faith that got him through. It's the same for us. Our foundation is built on faith. It has to be. What's going to keep you through the storm, what's going to keep you through the hard times in life, when it all comes undone, is your faith. If you have your faith, it doesn't matter. Come hell or high water, you're going to be just fine. I'm not saying it's not going to affect you. I'm not saying you're not going to feel it. I'm not saying any of that. It's going to happen. But you're going to make it through if you're on a firm foundation. It's very important. Those skyscrapers that we were looking at, which I've always been fascinated with, those things are still standing, some of those things, over 100 years, coming up on 100 years. And they have no plans to shut them down because they did it right. The reason, you guys know this, right? The reason all the skyscrapers in New York City are where they're at in Manhattan is because it's a bedrock there. If you ever go into Central Park, you can see the stone and how massive, and it makes a great spot to build. Now, we've come a long way with engineering. The Burj Khalifa, obviously, they build on sand, but they had to overcome a huge obstacle. And the biggest obstacle to that building was the foundation. They could have never done that if they didn't figure out a way to give that building a solid foundation. So even when it looks impossible to have a foundation that's solid, it's still doable. And I'm going to end with this last little quick analogy. Sometimes we've realized in life we've built a building and it's not on the greatest foundation. Well, when that happens, you only got a couple of choices. Sometimes you got to tear it down, start all over. However, there are times when you can go back and you can make adjustments. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can go back and you can get in there and you can put a foundation even after a building's been built. Moose wouldn't know anything about that. He started out where he's at his house, and it made me think of the pictures too when I saw it. It was just meant to be a cabin. It was never meant to be any more than that. And so, of course, they didn't do all that. Well, they've, over the years, turned it into a beautiful home. And one of the last steps was going back and putting a foundation in. And I was laughing when he sent me the picture. And I said, weren't you supposed to do that first or something like that? And he was like, exactly. But it's possible, right? They found a way to do it. They have techniques, and they shored it up, and they've gone back, and they put in a beautiful foundation. So I'm share that because it made me think about our lives are a lot like that. A lot of us have got a lot of years going on here, and we look back and go, yeah, my foundation's probably not the best. So it's not too late even then. You can go back and shore it up. Don't ever forget that. It doesn't matter where you're at in life. Does not matter how long you've been along. You can go back and shore up your foundation. It can be done. Let me pray for you. Father, it's a simple concept, and we all know about it. We know it with buildings, that we need solid foundations. But even more so, in our spiritual lives, we need a foundation that we can build on. Jesus, you said in this life we will have trouble. I think we all agree that that is the truth. But you said to not worry too much because you've overcome this world. And so there's a key there for us to tune into and build our foundation on the very person who knows how to do this. And that's you, Jesus. You've overcome this world. So, Father, no matter where we're at in our spiritual journeys, I ask that you would reveal to us the cracks in the foundation. You would reveal to us the weak spots that we need to go back in, maybe remove some stuff, and shore it up and put in the right kind of foundation. Father, I pray this week you would reveal that to individuals here and those watching. Whatever it is that needs to be shored up, needs to be changed, needs to be fixed, and done the right way. Father, I pray that you would make that realization come to life. And then we would begin to take the steps to get this thing fixed. Father, we love you. We thank you. I ask that you would bless everyone here today and those watching. In your name we pray. Amen.